We are so honored to have you join us for this episode of Beyond the Loss. I'm Aditi Leverage, bereaved parent to two and parent to one living child. I'm a specialized pregnancy and infant loss coach and founder of the registered charity, the Pregnancy and Infant Loss Support Center.
And I'm Danyelle bereaved parent to my daughter Emelina and parent to two living daughters. I am the co-founder and director of operations for the Pregnancy and Infant Loss Support Center. On this show, we share real stories about parenting and healing through pregnancy and infant loss. We allow space for the often silenced truths around loss to be heard. We offer an affirmative space for all people impacted by loss to share their stories, their triumphs, and their healing.
Please remember that the stories shared are personal stories and are not to be used in replacement of professional advice. Please visit our charity link in the show notes for additional support should you need.
We are so excited to have you join us for today's episode. Let's start talking.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to Beyond the Loss. Today it is Danyelle and I, and we have been wanting to cover this topic for a while, so we thought today would be the day. And it is about how to navigate loss with a living child. So I personally don't have a lived experience with this. I've supported clients through it, but when I experienced my losses, I did not have any living children at the time, but Danyelle did. And I think her perspective will offer a lot of insight and hopefully some support for those of you who are currently navigating loss with a living child. So thank you, Danyelle, for being willing to share, as always, your personal journey and being with us.
Yes, thank you, Aditi. This is something that is very near and dear to my heart. My oldest daughter was 6.5 to be precise, when her sister Emelina passed away. And when her sister passed away, my older daughter, this is something she'd wanted for a very long time. She had seen all of her friends have siblings. She knew her cousin was getting a sibling. So the birth of Emelina for her was extremely exciting and extremely wanted. So as you can imagine, when she found out her sister had passed away, it was very devastating to her. And because she was 6.5, she really did understand it. And in our group and in our community that was close to us, nobody had experienced the loss of a sibling. So Kat was made to feel very much isolated, just in the fact that she felt anyways, that nobody understood what that loss was. And she's kind of carried that on through most of her childhood and into her teens, where she's kind of felt like there's a sister that I knew I was going to have, but I don't have her, and nobody around me knows about it. And how do I share my feelings and how do I deal with this? And I'll be honest, we've seen some emotional and grief related behaviors through the last 9 years. And when we experienced a loss to start with, we had her seen by a child loss specialist, a child life specialist. We'd had her seen by some children's therapists throughout this process. However, it wasn't until she hit grade 3 where we really noticed that there was a lot of grieving that she was doing that she wasn't sharing with the rest of us. And for her, it came out with separation anxiety to like very extreme, to where she would be attached to her teacher. And then as she got older, we can see it in her, the amount of anxiety she has and how she moves through that anxiety. If you asked her, she would tell you, oh, it has nothing to do with the loss. However, in the time that I've been part of this community and I've seen my own grief and my own struggles, I'm confident that I can say that it is because of the loss, because the loss happened at such an impactful point of her life. a little bit older, a little bit younger, I believe that the impacts would have been different.
They may present different, but I think that there are impacts that, yeah, a lot of people, parents and the children obviously included, don't necessarily realize that it is equated to the loss. And at 6.5 years old, like, she clearly understood what had happened. So I guess for me, because you as parents, both you and your partner as parents, were navigating your own grief, losing your daughter. And then you had a 6.5 year old who, was processing it in her own way, but also, probably a typical 6.5 year old, which, is still joyful and wanting to do things and like, mom, take me here and let's do this. How did you navigate that? Because I think that that's one of the biggest questions I get from clients is, I don't have time to grieve when I have a living child. So how did you navigate that space?
Well, I was grieving. So for the first 2 weeks, our oldest daughter spent a lot of time with her grandparents and with us. However, my husband, my partner well, I guess he's still my partner. He, at that back in that time frame, he really took on a lot of the everyday stuff. So he would get up, he would make sure her lunch was made, he would get her off to school. I would be responsible for picking her up so that I would have a good portion of my day. So for me, I was, quote, lucky in the aspect that she had school to go to, and school allowed for some normalcy in her life. And it also allowed me some time to be able to really grieve and be sad without it always being with her. Because one thing that are both my children, my older living one and my younger living one, is if I'm crying, it drives them crazy. And they both of them, they really are challenged with that. So for Kat, she was really challenged if I would get upset and if I would show emotion. Kat took it very personally. So our older daughter took it very personally. And that, I guess that's the hardest piece, is trying to explain that it was not her. It had nothing to do with her, that I was just sad. I was missing her sister, and that was totally okay. So for me, I took a step back, honestly, from parenting for a while. My husband really stepped up and did some of the day to day. I had an amazing community. My neighbors next door would cook us dinner, and they would make sure a couple times a week that she had friends to play with after school. We had friends that would take her on Saturdays to go and do something fun, like to a bouncy castle or out to the beach or whatever. So that, again, her life would be as normal as we possibly could make it. Even though I personally was not ready to get out of the house, I didn't want to go sit in a play place because to me that was very triggering. We had a community around us that saw that and they were able to support that. However, we had a lot of transitions within the first 6 months of Emelina passing away, with a move and new jobs and the selling of our house. And in hindsight, for Kat, that was probably the worst thing we could have done for her, is we took her, quote, normal life and we moved provinces. Her dad left for 3 months to work. So I would say, like, when you're dealing with children's grief, normalcy is probably the most important. And we kind of threw that out the window, which is why I think some of her grief even now is part of that normalcy that we took away. And some of it is also, she's still to this day grieving that sister that she thought she was going to have. She'd seen the ultrasound pictures. She got to help plan the nursery. She got to pick clothes. She got to, pick books for her sister. So to do all of that and be so involved and to have that just taken away. And it wasn't as if there was a cause for it. Stillbirth is hard for kids to understand because you're told that there's a baby in mommy's tummy and that everything is good, and then in the next moment you're told, well, the baby, is dead and it's died and there's really nothing we could have done. And then we expect our children to just be able to deal with that. And yeah, she understood what death was. We've had family members that have died. However, this baby that she never really got to see because it was in mom's stomach it was also a challenge for her. And we were able to bring her to the hospital for her to meet her sister. However, her sister was a stillbirth. She had been deceased for a few days. So when she was birthed, she wasn't like a normal baby. She was almost like a doll, I would say. So that was another piece to it. And then we added another layer with my sister giving birth to my nephew just a few days later. And so on top of my cat having, or our daughter having to experience the loss of her sister, she also experienced the birth of her cousin's sibling. And that has been very hard for her to bond with that cousin because she doesn't think she's always felt that it wasn't there, and unfortunately, pregnancy loss, stillbirth, infant loss, child loss, it's not fair. And I can never tell her that it is fair. However, we've experienced it, so we need to kind of walk the journey step by step.
Yeah, and you said like a lot of things there that I'd like to like dig a little deeper into, if you don't mind. One of the things that I'm curious about is, so if you could take us back to, and this might be challenging, so I apologize, but this is about the real talk, and you and I have never actually talked in depth about it. But if you could take us back to that moment you found out Emelina had died, and then of course now you need to let Kat, your living daughter, know. Do you remember, and you may not even remember because it was probably quite traumatic, but can you recall how you told her and if there was anything you would have done differently?
That's the hard part. We didn't actually tell her. So when we were making the phone calls, because this was a Monday, Kat was at school, and then we had texted our day home provider, who is an old friend of mine from university days, that what had happened, and we were trying to figure out who was going to pick her up from day home. And we said, like, can you do your best to like not say anything, because we don't know what we're going to do at this point. So my mom dropped what she was doing and was able to get out to our home because we were about 30 minutes away. And in that process, she also had to go to our house and get stuff because, again, when I'd gone to my midwife appointment, nowhere did I expect that I'd be delivering a baby, no less delivering a baby that was born still. So in that process, my mom did her best to keep it like, yeah, you're just coming to stay at Nan's house. Mom's just got some stuff to do. And then when we were trying to make the decision on how to tell Kat, because we wanted to tell her before kind of it got out further than what we had already shared with our close network, we had asked my mom to bring her to the hospital. But the issue came was when my mom said, hey, we need to go to the hospital to see your mom. She thought she was getting a sister. So she thought her sister was being born. So my mom was like, I can't in good faith take her to the hospital and traumatize this child, because now all of a sudden she's only going to think the hospital is where dead people come, right? Like, we want the hospital to be a safe space for her. So my mom did very quietly and gently let her know that her sister had passed and that mom was in the hospital because mom had to give birth. And Kat, our oldest daughter, is very logical and very reasonable. So after she cried and was sad, she looked at my mom and said, that's okay because now I have an angel. And we were like, this is like minutes. And she's like, Mom, we all need, or Nanny, we all need angels. And so she came to the hospital before I gave birth because it took a long time. My inductions take a very, very long time. because I am very good at keeping my children in until they're ready to come. So because the induction took a long time, she came the evening that we found out, and then we brought her back in the morning to meet her sister later. But it was hard. It was hard
You brought her back home? Like, you were
So
able to bring her home?
so we were able to bring Kat to our older daughter to the hospital to meet Emelina before we went home. So we were able to bring her. So she came to the hospital to just see mom and dad, to know that we were okay, if there was nothing wrong with mom. And then the next day we brought her back, and we had our sister in like a bassinet in the room, and we let her decide what she wanted. So it was really important to me to give Kat choices, because choices matter to kids. And what I found with my two living daughters is, when we're dealing with grief, because we've dealt with it a few different times over the last few years, is they're once they hit about 4 or 5, they are able to make choices. So for us, we've always made the choice: do you want to hold your sister? The choices were: do you want to hold her? Do you want to see her? Would you like to touch her? Would you like mom to hold her? What would you like? And by doing that, we kind of empowered her to start the journey of grief. She did not want to hold her sister. She did look at her sister. However, her sister at that point was about 12 hours old, and it was before the hospital got the cuddle cot. So she was not in great condition. So she talked to her. There was a stuffy that we've been given that she took, that she kept for years. It just recently went into our memory box. But we've really let Kat make the choices. There were blankets. We were given a blanket at the hospital by one of the nurses that had sat with us. And we asked Kat if she wanted to keep the blanket or if she wanted to put her in sister's room. And she was able to keep this blanket. And to be honest, it's still in her. So this is 9 years later. That blanket is still with Kat. It's a very special piece to her, and it kind of connects her back to her sister. So she was gifted this blanket, and that to me was actually one of the most profound pieces, is that Kat was given something that she could hold, she could wrap around herself, that she could just be safe with. And again, we've done our best to always let her lead the way with the grief. So to talk about her sister when she was comfortable, to not talk about her sister. When she went back to school a few weeks after, she was in grade 1, and there was this journal. They were doing journal entries, and I don't know what the topic was that day, but I still have the journal, and it says, it says something around the fact that she has an angel sister and she misses her sister. So have worked with her school all through her elementary years. We worked with her school very closely, again, to make sure that we had choices and that Kat had choices, so that her teachers, right from grade 1 through to grade 6, all knew that she had a sister that had passed away.
So you do have a question, because it sounds like, you, having never have navigated this journey, obviously, before, you've never had a stillbirth, and you never had a stillbirth with a living child. So, you did the best that you could. And I like that, you talked about giving Kat choice and how she wanted to meet her sister. And then, letting your Kat's teachers all the way up until grade 6 too, that she had a sibling that died. I think that's really lovely. I guess my question is, when you first, so you didn't actually tell her because you explained why, but I get a lot of questions from clients of what do I say? And so I always try to let them know that it's important to use the word death and dying, so that they know that it's final, because a child of 6.5 understands, but they maybe don't fully understand the finality of things if we use the word past or other ways. So I'm curious to know, when you had further conversations, what was the language that you used so that she could understand that her sister was not coming back?
See, that's the hard part because I don't think we use death and dying that much in the first few years. We got a book which I give out a lot, which is I was gonna have a baby, but instead I have an angel. And we use books to really continue to have those conversations. For me, reading was really helpful, and reading to this day, if I want to teach my kids a new concept, or if I want to, we've dealt with some passings over some deaths over the last 6 months, we kind of go back to those books on, what is death, or kind of things along that line. So for us, and there weren't a ton of books back 9 years ago. There's a whole lot more now. So when I'm talking to my younger child who is 6.5 and who has experienced passing of some close relatives this year, it's been easier to have those conversations, as well as she's always known that she has had a sister, so that is an angel. So for us, death is like something we talk about now. Back 9 years ago, we didn't talk a lot about death. She knew that one of my grandmothers has passed, and she'd been to the cemetery and to put flowers, and she'd been to a couple of funerals. However, her sister was different. We didn't bury her sister. We didn't feel comfortable doing that because our life was too up in the air. So for her, she's never had necessarily a space to go to have that grief, or to say, okay, this is where your sister is. It's in an urn. Back when she first passed, it was in an urn in our living room. Now it's in an urn in our bedroom. So for us, I would say it was really the books, because the books helped us have conversations. The books really allowed it to be normalized. And the more we normalized it for her, even though her friends had not necessarily experienced it, the more she was comfortable talking about it, which is why we did tell her. By the time I got to grade 6, I really didn't need to have that conversation. But in grade 2 and 3 and 4, I really did need to have that conversation. I really needed them to understand that she was going to talk about her sister, and that was totally okay for her to talk about her sister. With that, however, she did have some big anxieties, and we needed to kind of work together as a team in order to support her while she went through that. So, my mom had many conversations with her own children about passings, because I had lost grandparents very early. I'd lost aunts and uncles. By the time I was 12, I'd attended like 6 or 8 funerals. So it was nice in the aspect that my mom was comfortable having those conversations, comfortable with those emotions, because she, in her past, had to have those conversations with her own children. However, having a conversation about your grandchild with your grandchild is a little bit different.
Yeah, and I have so many questions. So I want to back it up. Do you feel now, with the work that you've done through the center and the work that you've been doing over the last 9 years, is there anything that you think you would have maybe done differently?
Yeah, I think I would have really spent more time looking for sibling support groups. It was very hard for us. We lived in a smaller community. We did not live in Calgary. We lived in BC in a smaller community. All the research and all the supports there for group support was more where they were talking about siblings who were older than passed. There was really nothing for us to be able to connect her with, siblings who had experienced pregnancy loss. I also think if I was to do it again, I probably would have gotten her more play therapy or art therapy or something along that lines. Not on a weekly basis, not even on a bi-weekly basis, just on a monthly basis. So she would have had somebody to connect to, where maybe she would have shared some of her feelings that she wasn't sharing, especially in that first 3 years. There were a lot of feelings that I know she was having, but she wasn't sharing them with us. And the school counselors did the best that they could, but school counselors really, their plates are full, and they're dealing with, I would say, not bigger issues, but they have to prioritize their time. And a child that's dealing with grief is not going to get the attention. So although we'd had her seen here and there, we didn't have it consistent enough. And that's the one thing I would say is, we're grieving, and as we journey, we need that support, more at some points, less at others. I really wish that we would have found something to provide her support, which is why we do the children support and the sibling support through the center, so that families and children do get the support and they know that they're not alone. Because some of the, as individuals who give birth and as, parents, we feel alone. The children feel alone just as much as we do. Kat felt like she could never fit in because she didn't have a sibling here on earth. So when she would talk about her sister, people would be like, you don't have a sister. I don't see her. And the education of the kids, the teachers that she had did a great job. However, it's still hard for kids to understand.
Yeah, totally. And I think like the death of a baby is so hard for children to wrap their minds around, because when we're talking about death with children, it's usually, well, our grandparents, they got old and they died, and that's like the natural like cycle of life. Or someone got sick and then they died. And like you said at the beginning, like stillbirth, there was no reason. And even if there was, if we say to a child like, well, the baby was sick and didn't make it, it can make a child really scared then about them dying, because it is so, it's children and it's a baby. Like babies don't usually quote unquote die, right? Like those are the conversations we have when we talk about death and dying. It's usually older people or sick people. And so I can understand a little bit when you said Kat had anxieties, because I imagine, and I don't know, but I imagine that some of those anxieties stemmed from that, a very like unexpected death of a baby. It's hard for us as grown-ups to wrap our head around the death of a baby, but for a child, I can imagine there'd be a lot of processing.
There is. And in the years to follow, if anybody was ever pregnant around us, her comment was always, well, I hope their baby doesn't die. And you have to understand, my child is very logical. So she didn't mean it. She never meant it rudely. She meant it very compassionately. But she would always say to me, Mom, I really hope their baby doesn't die. And I was like, well, honey, like, you're right. We hope that their baby doesn't die. There's really no words to say, oh, well, it'll be okay or it won't. I can't tell her that because we didn't expect ours. So even, as we became pregnant with her younger sister years later, she kind of was on that fence the whole time. Like as much as I was preparing myself for, the possibility that this baby may pass, or our daughter was preparing herself. And I guess that's the hardest piece, even as we journey through these 9 years, is she's always preparing herself to find out that somebody's sibling has passed away, or that, if somebody around us is pregnant, even at 15, she's like, Mom, I really hope that they don't have, a baby like Emelina. It always brings her back. I mean, it brings me back when we're surrounded with family members who are giving birth. And I always, hope that they have that happy, healthy baby. However, I'm always preparing myself that they aren't. Apparently, as years have gone by, that's the same thing for my older child.
Yeah, and I think that's something very common in our community as a whole, is that like we're always hopeful, but there's always a piece of us that's preparing for death, always. And so it's interesting that has shown up with Kat. And I think that's a reality probably for a lot of the younger people who have been through loss of a sibling. That's probably pretty common. And I imagine that, like, I don't know the statistics, but I would imagine that COVID-19 has increased a lot of that for many siblings and many families, because when you have been that 1%, again, we're always hoping for the best and preparing for death. So I imagine that if we actually looked at schools and saw kids that have heightened anxiety around, let's say, COVID-19 or viruses and sicknesses in general, I'd be interested to see what the linkage there with like grief and loss personally would be, because I don't know, that's just me thinking out loud, but I feel like there's probably a correlation.
I totally can see that that would be something that kids who've experienced the loss of a sibling, whether it be a baby, an older child, even a miscarriage. We were very clear with Kat from early on with our last pregnancy that we were pregnant and the stages we were going through, and you know what to expect and how long it was going to be, et cetera, because she'd already experienced the loss of a sibling. I wasn't going to hide a miscarriage from her. I wasn't going to hide another stillbirth from her. We let her dictate again how much she wanted to be involved. She wanted to go to the ultrasound. She wanted to know what she was having. She was going to have a sister or a brother. She wanted to know, she wanted a fair say in like the clothes that were bought. So we really let her drive the bus. Again, going back to those choices, to this day, we still allow her to drive the bus with the choices, how we celebrate Emelina's birthday, anniversary, however we're going to call it. Again, it's pretty much up to our kids. I do my own thing that I need. My partner does his own thing he needs. But as a family, we let our kids really dictate what they want and how they want to do it. Most recently, we created a special project for the center, and we let our kids dictate what that looked like. They have the ultimate say in it, and let me tell you, two very strong-willed, logical children trying to design something was an interesting feat, especially when one is 6.5 and one is 15. However, it was important for us to let them have that piece of it. When it comes to COVID-19 and any of the stress that would say be around that, again, we have kind of tried to take where they are with it. So speaking a lot about it isn't my kids' thing. They don't want to talk about it. So we don't. When they want to talk about it, we do.
Now that Kat, and I want people who are listening, Danyelle is like not sharing anything without, the permission of Kat. Kat's been quite involved with the center and shares, like even with me, she's spoken about it, just so that people know, because teenagers can be challenging sometimes. Kat is not one of them. Well, I don't parent her, but I just want people to know that. But I am curious to know, because I've seen it in different ways through the work with the center. But how does Kat kind of carry this experience on her sister now that it's been 9 years since the loss?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I would say so through the 9 years, she's carried the experience very differently. So when she was younger, she spoke very loud and clear about it. As she's gotten older, she tends to be more thoughtful about how she shares her sister and who she shares it with and when she shares it. The more that I've spoken about the loss of her sister and the more work we do, the more it has made it comfortable for her to make choices that she really believes in. When she was younger, I think she did it just because she wanted people to know that she had a sibling. Like, I'm not, like, they would say, oh, you don't have a sibling or whatever. And she'd be like, no, I do. Now that she's, in her teens and she's kind of venturing into that adulthood sooner than I would like, she really is very selective. She loves the stuff she does with the center. She loves to really honor her sister her way. However, she's not as loud about it like she used to be. She is much more intentional with it. And I think that her becoming much more intentional with it has helped her through her grief journey. Sometimes I feel like when she was younger and she was, trying to make people understand that she had a sibling, it was harder for her. Whereas now it's like, you know what? I don't need everybody to know. That's my sibling. And I almost feel sometimes that it's very special to her that she has this sibling. we find it's our youngest who's never met her sister, and who came after her sister, who speaks more freely about it and tends to ask more questions.
Yeah, again, because that she's of that age, right, where that honesty just exists, right? I think as we grow older, we get, like you said, more thoughtful of who and how we share. I think that's probably what's happened. It's interesting to see how the grief and how she carries Emelina with her has also changed, just like all of us as we go through this journey. And I don't I there's definitely not one way and not any wrong or right way for families to navigate grief with a living child. It's sort of like this thing that happens, and then we kind of learn how to move through these very stormy waters. And so do families get it perfect? No. Do they learn? Yes. And can we share kind of what we could have maybe done differently or wished we would have done differently? I think that's huge. From my perspective, I think, like, if I was to share things just from the outside perspective of seeing clients and hearing stories, I would say definitely, like, you use those words, death and dying, if you can, to make it like clear that this is final. Have those conversations. And then what I see is like, what I like to say is like, let your kids see you grieve. And what I really liked about what you said, Danyelle, is like, Kat's, the way that she carries Emelina now has changed. But I see it like she's been very helpful in the center. She's very thoughtful. She gets very, like, if we ask her to help with something at the center, I see that like, she's a teenager, right? Probably helping at the center isn't fun, right? But she does it in a way that I can see is like, there is something there that is like, she understands that she's doing it in the memory of Emelina. And I think she watches you and how you are carrying Emelina and speaking so openly and honestly about your experience. And I think that's the biggest gift that we can give our children, whether it's right in that kind of acute grief or years later, and probably many years later, is that we show them how grieving can be done, right? And I think that that's going to be a really powerful gift, that you're not only building this legacy for Emelina, but I think you're giving a gift to both your girls in what we're building here, and like putting this into conversation, putting in the supports that didn't exist when we were going through it, and letting them see that, like, this is nothing to be shameful about. It's not secret, and there's other people out there. I just think that's such a powerful gift to give our children. It shows them what grief looks like at all stages of our lives.
Yeah, and it's important for us that we share Emelina with her sisters, because one day we are going to pass. And it is my hope that my children continue to remember their sister and continue to hold her memory and her legacy, moving it forward, however they choose. It's something that I never thought I would have to think about. My grandmother, who's no longer with us, she passed before I even got married. She had lost a child at a fairly young age. And I always go back to the fact that her children talk about him. And her children, when they go put flowers on her grave, they put flowers on his grave. And myself, as a grandchild, I do the same thing. And our hope is that they, that Emelina, much like the uncle I never knew who passed at a young age, that they're remembered, and that they're always, part of their siblings' lives in some way or some way or somehow.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And like I said, there's no one way to navigate this journey. But I think the more that we talk about the reality of life with loss and having a living child, I think my hope is that people will resonate with some of the words that you said and understand that there isn't one way to do it, and we're all doing the best that we can. And there is a community out here that quote unquote gets it. We at the center have the siblings and loss art therapy program. That's for kiddos aged 3 all the way up till, what is the age, Danielle?
12 right now.
So 3 to 12 who have experienced the loss of a sibling either through pregnancy and infant loss or through any other type of loss that one might lose a sibling. It's it's play therapy for the younger kiddos, so the 3 to 5, and then it's art therapy for the 6 to 12 group. And it's another outlet so that these young little people who are holding grief and loss and the experience of grief and loss, they have an outlet. I thank you, Danielle, for being honest about, the realities of having a child while you were navigating your own grief. It's something that we need to talk about more. I just want to ask you one final question, which is what we ask our other guests, and I never ask you usually, but knowing what you know now, what would you tell yourself then?
I'd probably give myself 2 pieces of advice. One, continue to look for the resources when you feel that when your child needs them. So I quit looking because I couldn't find what I was looking for. However, I knew that she needed them. So keep looking. I mean, we have a center which we can support all through Canada, as well as the second piece is that their grief is going to pivot and their needs are going to change over time. So be adaptable. What worked 6 months ago may not work for them now. What worked a year ago may be what you need to do now that maybe you weren't doing. So I think that just being able to pivot and adapt and then just keep looking. I wish I would have, when one counselor didn't work, I would have kept looking for that next one because I knew in my gut that we needed something. I just quit looking.
Yeah, and I think that's probably pretty common because let's face it, when we are experiencing grief and loss, it's tiring, it's exhausting, it's depleting. And if we have to look really hard, we're probably going to stop. So I totally resonate with that. And your second piece of advice too, of like what they need now could change in 6 months. And I think that goes for parents as well, or caregivers as well, is that what's working right now may not work in the next 8 months. So be adaptable, understand that to lean in and to continue to try to find that support that resonates for where you are currently at in your grief journey. So thank you so much, Danyelle, for sharing all of your daughters and all of the experiences. And we will see you next time on Beyond the Loss.